Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. My name is Julian. It's strange how a single moment can unravel everything you thought was certain. For me, that moment came when my wife, Elena, left for her younger sister's Bachelorette weekend. It seemed innocent enough, a celebration, a getaway with friends, but what happened during those few days tore apart the life we'd built together. I'm going to take you through it, step by step, from the very beginning, because sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest consequences. Elena and I have been married for 3 years. We were past the honeymoon phase, but still in that sweet spot where we were growing together, figuring out what it meant to be partners. Our marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is, but it was grounded in trust. We'd shared countless moments of joy, from late-night talks to quiet mornings planning our future. Elena was my rock, someone I could count on, or so I thought. But even the strongest foundations can hide fault lines. When we were dating, I noticed something about Elena and alcohol. It wasn't about how much she drank. Sometimes a single glass was enough to change her. She'd become someone else, unguarded and unpredictable. We talked about it, fought about it, even cried over it. She recognized it too, and after one too many nights that ended in regret, she promised to steer clear of alcohol entirely. It was a pact we made, especially after we got married. We both wanted a family, and we were deliberate about creating a stable, healthy life for the child we hoped to have. Alcohol was off the table, no exceptions. Life after marriage settled into a calm rhythm. The wild nights of our early days were behind us, replaced by routines that felt meaningful. We were trying to conceive, and Elena was as committed as I was to making sure everything was right for a pregnancy. So when she told me, just a few weeks into our 3rd year of marriage, that she was pregnant, about 6 weeks along, I was over the moon. The way her face glowed when she shared the news is etched in my memory. It felt like the start of something new, something sacred. But then came the invitation. Elena's younger sister, Lila, was getting married, and she wanted Elena at her Bachelorette weekend in Las Vegas. Lila was the opposite of Elena. Bold, impulsive, always chasing the next thrill. I'd heard stories about her and her friends, and I wasn't thrilled about the idea of Elena joining them. A bachelorette party in Vegas, with a crowd I barely knew, sounded like trouble. I told Elena how I felt. "I won't be there to watch out for you," I said. "You know how Lila is, and you're pregnant now. I just don't think it's a good idea." She listened, her eyes soft but determined. She promised it would be fine, just a girl's trip, no drinking, no chaos. She'd tell everyone she was pregnant and stick to mocktails. "Don't worry, Julian," she said, squeezing my hand. "I've got this." I wanted to believe her. She'd never given me a reason to doubt her before, so I pushed my unease aside. I helped her pack, zipping up her suitcase while she debated which earrings to bring. I drove her to the airport, kissed her forehead, and told her to have fun but be safe. As she walked away, I stood there longer than I needed to, watching her disappear into the terminal. The house felt too quiet when I got back. I kept busy, work, errands, anything to keep my mind from wandering. I told myself everything would be fine. 3 days later, I picked Elena up from the airport. She looked worn out but happy, her smile bright as she hugged me. On the drive home, she was full of stories. How Vegas was all lights and energy, how Lila had the time of her life, how the girls danced until dawn. It sounded like a whirlwind, but harmless. She didn't mention alcohol, and I didn't ask. Her excitement was contagious, and I let myself relax, thinking she'd kept her promise. For a moment, everything felt normal. But in the days that followed, something shifted. Elena seemed distant, like a wall had gone up between us. When I reached for her at night, she'd turn away, mumbling about being tired. I chalked it up to pregnancy, hormones, fatigue, the usual. I'd read about how the first trimester could be rough, so when she brushed off my concerns with a quiet, "I'm just exhausted," I didn't push. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, reading into things that weren't there. But the distance grew, and a nagging feeling settled in my chest, like a storm cloud I couldn't quite see. 2 weeks later, everything changed. I was unloading groceries when my phone buzzed with a text from an old friend, someone I trusted. The message was cryptic, saw the video. "Doesn't look good. You okay?" I stared at it, confused. Video? What was he talking about? I texted back, asking for clarity, but he didn't respond. The silence felt heavy, so I called him. His voice was tense, apologetic. "I thought you knew," he said. "I'm sending it now, but just be ready." When the video arrived, my world tilted. It was short, barely a minute, but it was enough. The footage was grainy, clearly shot on a phone, but there was no mistaking Elena. She was in a tight dress, swaying unsteadily, clearly drunk. She was kissing a stranger, a shirtless guy who looked like he belonged in a club promo. Women cheered in the background as she climbed onto his lap, whispering something in his ear, her hands draped around his neck. I watched it again, then again, hoping I'd miss something, some detail that would make it less damning. But it was her, breaking every promise she'd made. My first thought wasn't even about the betrayal. It was the baby. She was pregnant, and she was drinking. The recklessness, the disregard for everything we'd planned, hit me like a punch. She'd come home acting like nothing happened, smiling and chatting as if that weekend was just a fun escape. Now, I couldn't unsee the truth. What else had happened that wasn't caught on camera? And why had she lied so effortlessly? The questions swirled, each one sharper than the last, pulling me toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. I sat on the couch, the phone still in my hand, the video looping in my mind, even though the screen had gone dark. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. Elena was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. Every clink of a plate, every casual note in her voice, felt like a betrayal stacked on top of the one I'd just seen. I didn't know how to confront her, but I knew I couldn't let it sit. The truth was out, and it was burning a hole through me. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, replaying the video in my head. The way Elena moved, so uninhibited, so unlike the woman I knew. The cheers from the crowd, the stranger's smirk, her hands on his shoulders, it was all so vivid, so undeniable. I kept asking myself how she could do this. Not just the drinking, not just the kiss, but the lie she'd carried home with her. She'd looked me in the eyes, told me about the fun weekend, and left out the part where she broke every promise we'd made. Worse, she was carrying our child. The thought of her putting our baby at risk made my stomach churn. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until we were alone, after she'd finished cleaning up the kitchen. She walked into the living room, drying her hands on a dish towel, her face relaxed, maybe even content. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. I didn't look up right away. I couldn't. "Elena," I said, my voice low but steady. "We need to talk about Vegas." Her footsteps stopped. The air in the room shifted, like the temperature had dropped. "What about Vegas?" she asked, her tone cautious, like she was already bracing for something. I looked up then, meeting her eyes. They were wide, searching, but there was something else, guilt, maybe, or fear. "Is there anything you need to tell me?" I asked, giving her a chance to come clean. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She just stood there, clutching the towel. I didn't want to drag it out. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the video, and handed it to her. "Watch this," I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be. She took the phone, her hands trembling slightly. As the video played, I watched her face. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open, and then her shoulders slumped. "Julian, it's not what it looks like," she said quickly, her voice shaking as she handed the phone back. "It was just a stupid dare. I didn't even know that guy. I was drunk, drunk." I cut her off, my voice rising despite myself. "You promised me, Elena. No alcohol. Especially not now. You're pregnant. You told me you'd be responsible. And instead, you were what? Kissing some random guy? Climbing all over him while a room full of people cheers." I shook my head, my hands clenched into fists. "And you came home acting like everything was fine. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" She started crying, her hands covering her face. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't sleep with him, I swear. It was just a kiss, just a dumb moment." But her words felt hollow. I want to believe her, but the video was too raw, too real. And the more she talked, the less her story held together. First, She said she didn't know the guy. Then she said he might have been a bartender. Then it was a dare for one of the girls, but she couldn't remember who. Every sentence felt like a scramble to cover her tracks, and I couldn't tell if she was lying to me or to herself. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but heavy with disbelief. "You don't even know what happened, do you? You were too drunk to remember. And what about the rest of the night?" Walls didn't make it into that video. She flinched like I'd hit her, but she didn't answer. She just kept crying, her sobs filling the room. I wanted to feel sorry for her, but all I felt was a cold, aching emptiness. That night, I couldn't stay in our bedroom. I grabbed a pillow and a blanket and headed to the guest room. Elena followed me down the hall, her voice breaking as she begged me to talk, to listen, to forgive her. "Julian, please," she whispered through the closed door. "It was a mistake. I love you. I don't want to lose us." But I didn't open the door. I couldn't. Her words didn't reach me anymore. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. Was this the first time she'd crossed a line? Had there been other nights, other secrets? And what had really happened in Vegas after that camera stopped rolling? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Elena moving around the house. She was trying to act normal, making coffee, setting out breakfast, but the tension between us was suffocating. We barely spoke. Lila's wedding was supposed to be that weekend, but neither of us mentioned it. The idea of sitting through a celebration, surrounded by people who might have seen the video, or worse, been there when it happened, was unbearable. I didn't want to face them, and I think Elena knew better than to suggest we go. The silence between us said enough. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the image of that video. It wasn't just what I saw, it was what it meant. Elena had broken her promise, not just to me, but to the future we were building. She'd risked our baby's health, our marriage, everything, for a night she claimed she barely remembered. And then there was the video itself. I learned from my friend that it had been posted online, shared by one of Lila's friends on social media. It had spread fast, picked up by some influencer who used it to rant about party girls and red flags. They didn't blur Elena's face. Strangers were watching my wife, judging her, judging us. The humiliation was a fresh wound every time I thought about it. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew things couldn't stay the same. Elena kept trying to talk, leaving notes, sending texts, promising to make things right. But every time I looked at her, I saw that video. I saw the stranger's hands, her smile, the crowd's laughter. And I couldn't help but wonder, what else was she hiding? What would it take to uncover the whole truth? The weight of those questions hung over me, pulling me further from the life we'd once shared, and I wasn't sure if there was any way back. The days after the confrontation stretched into a heavy, unbearable silence. Elena and I moved around each other like ghosts, sharing the same space but not the same reality. I went through the motions, work, meals, sleep, but my mind was stuck on that video, on her tearful excuses, on the promises she'd broken. Every time I looked at her, I felt a mix of anger and grief, like I was mourning someone who was still standing right in front of me. Elena tried to bridge the gap, leaving me coffee in the morning or sitting too close on the couch, but I couldn't meet her halfway. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Lila's wedding came and went. We didn't go, and no one asked why. I think Elena's sister knew something was wrong. Maybe she'd seen the video, maybe she'd heard whispers, but she didn't reach out, and I was grateful for it. The last thing I needed was to face her friends, the ones who'd cheered Elena on that night, or worse, the ones who'd filmed it. The video was still out there, circulating on social media, racking up views and comments from strangers who didn't know us but felt entitled to weigh in. I stopped checking my phone as much, but every notification felt like a potential landmine. What if someone else had seen it? What if they sent it to me, thinking I hadn't? Elena suggested therapy about a week after I showed her the video. "We can fix this, Julian," she said, her voice small but desperate. "I know I messed up, but we can work through it. I don't want to lose you." Her eyes were red from crying, and for a moment, I felt a pang of the old love we'd had. I agreed, not because I believed we could fix it, but because I wasn't ready to admit we couldn't. So we found a therapist, a calm woman with a quiet office downtown, and started weekly sessions. I didn't say much at first. Elena did most of the talking, spilling her guilt, her shame, her promises to be better. "I hate myself for what I did," she said, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't thinking. I let everyone down. I nodded, but inside I was numb. Her words sounded genuine, but they couldn't erase what I'd seen. In therapy, the therapist asked me to share how I felt. I struggled to find the words. Betrayed? Angry? Heartbroken? All of it was true, but none of it captured the depth of what I was carrying. "I don't trust her anymore," I finally said, my voice flat. "I don't know who she is when she's not with me." Elena flinched, but she didn't argue. The therapist pressed me to explain, but I couldn't. How do you explain that the person you thought you knew better than anyone suddenly feels like a stranger? How do you explain the fear that maybe you never really knew them at all? Outside of therapy, Elena tried to make things right. She stopped going out with friends, stayed home every night, and avoided anything that might remind me of Vegas. She even deleted her social media accounts, saying she didn't want to see the video or the comments anymore. But her efforts felt like too little, too late. The damage wasn't just in what she'd done. It was in how she'd hidden it, how she'd come home and played the part of the perfect wife while that video was out there, spreading like wildfire. I couldn't shake the thought that if my friend hadn't texted me, I might never have known. About a month after the Vegas trip, Elena started feeling unwell. At first, I thought it was just stress. Our home had become a pressure cooker of unspoken resentment. But then she started getting sick in the mornings, worse than the usual pregnancy symptoms. She was pale, tired, and quieter than usual. I drove her to the doctor, sitting in the waiting room with my hands clasped tightly, trying not to let my mind spiral. When the doctor called us in, the news hit like a sledgehammer. Elena had miscarried. The pregnancy was gone. She broke down in the exam room, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I stood there, frozen, my hand on her shoulder, but my heart somewhere else. I was devastated, of course. The loss of our child was a pain I hadn't prepared for. But part of me, the part one hated, felt a strange distance from it all. I'd already been grieving, not just the baby, but the life we'd planned, the trust we'd built. The miscarriage felt like the final crack in a foundation that was already crumbling. Elena blamed herself. "It's my fault," she whispered that night, curled up on the couch. The drinking, the stress, I did this. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't true, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know if it was her fault, but I couldn't stop thinking about the alcohol, the recklessness, the choices she'd made. The doctor had said miscarriages could happen for many reasons, that it wasn't always something you could pinpoint, but the timing felt too cruel to be a coincidence. I hated myself for thinking that way, but I couldn't help it. We went back to therapy, but it felt different now. Elena's guilt was heavier, and my anger was quieter, but no less present. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How she'd avoid my gaze, how she'd flinch when I mentioned the baby. I began to wonder if she was holding back more than she'd admitted. Had there been other moments in Vegas, ones no one filmed? Was the kiss really the worst of it? Or was there more she couldn't bring herself to say? The uncertainty was a poison, seeping into every corner of my mind. I started sleeping in the guest room more often. Elena stopped knocking on the door after a while, but I could hear her crying at night, her sobs muffled through the walls. I wanted to go to her, to hold her, to find some way back to what we'd had. But every time I tried, that video played in my head, and with it came the questions, what else don't I know? How can I ever trust her again? And what happens if I stay, knowing I might never get the full truth? The answers were out there, somewhere, but they felt further away with every passing day. The weeks following the miscarriage were a blur of grief and distance. Elena and I were living in the same house, but it felt like we were on different planets. The loss of the baby hung over us like a shadow, darkening every interaction. She tried to talk, to reach for me, but I couldn't meet her there. The video, the lies, the miscarriage, they'd woven themselves into a knot I couldn't untangle. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman from that grainy footage, not the wife I'd vowed to build a life with. Therapy continued, but it felt like a formality. Elena poured her heart out, her voice raw with regret. "I know I broke your trust. Julian, she'd say, her eyes pleading. I'll do anything to fix this. The therapist would nod, encouraging me to share, but my words were sparse. What could I say? That I didn't know who she was anymore? That I was afraid to ask what else happened in Vegas, because the truth might destroy me completely? I'd sit there, arms crossed, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Outside of therapy, Elena tried to rebuild what we'd lost. She cooked my favorite meals, left notes on the fridge with apologies and promises, even suggested we take a trip to start fresh. But her efforts only deepened the chasm between us. The notes felt like bribes, the meals like performances. I didn't want gestures, I wanted the truth, but I wasn't sure she could give it to me. Her story about that night in Vegas never got clearer. When I'd ask for details, she'd fumble, her answers vague or contradictory. It was just a kiss, she'd insist, but then she'd mention a different friend who dared her, or a new detail about the bartender that didn't match her earlier story. It was like she was piecing together a puzzle. She didn't fully understand herself. The video was still out there, a public wound that refused to heal. I'd stopped looking at social media, but I couldn't escape it entirely. A coworker mentioned it in passing, not realizing it was my wife, and I had to pretend I didn't hear. A distant cousin texted me, asking if I was okay after that clip. Each mention was a reminder that our private pain was a spectacle for strangers. The influencer who'd shared it had moved on to new content, but the damage lingered. I wondered how many people had seen Elena in that dress, laughing, drunk on that stranger's lap. I wondered if she'd ever tell me the whole story. One night, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I found Elena in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the screen. "We need to talk," I said, sitting across from her. She put the phone down, her expression wary but hopeful. "I've been trying to move past this," I started, my voice steady but heavy. "But I can't. Not when I don't know what really happened. You say it was just a kiss, but you were drunk. You don't even remember everything, do you?" She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I told you everything I know," she whispered. "It was a mistake, Julian. I was stupid, but it wasn't more than that." "Then why does it feel like you're hiding something?" I pressed. "Your story keeps changing. One minute it's a dare, the next it's some guy you barely noticed. You can't even tell me who was there, who filmed it. How am I supposed to believe you when you don't even know?" My voice cracked, and I hated how vulnerable it made me sound. Elena started crying again, but this time I didn't feel the pull to comfort her. "I need the truth," I said. "All of it. If there's more, tell me now." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "There's nothing else," she said, but her voice was so small, so uncertain, that it only deepened my doubt. I stood up, walked to the guest room, and closed the door. Her sobs followed me, but I didn't go back. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with the same questions that had haunted me for weeks. What had happened after the video ended? Had she done this before, on other nights I'd never questioned? The uncertainty was a weight I couldn't carry much longer. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, caught between wanting to save our marriage and fearing I'd never trust her again. I called a lawyer, not to file for divorce, not yet, but to understand my options. The conversation was clinical, detached, but it felt like a step toward clarity. When I hung up, I didn't feel relieved, but I felt something shift. I was tired of waiting for Elena to give me answers she might not have. I needed to take control, even if it meant tearing down everything we'd built. Elena noticed the change in me. "Are you giving up on us?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling as we stood in the kitchen. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say no, to tell her we could still find a way, but the words wouldn't come. "I don't know," I said finally. "I don't know if I can stay when I can't trust you." Her face crumpled, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The hurt in her eyes was real, but so was mine, and I wasn't sure either of us could heal it. As the days turned into weeks, I started to imagine a life without her. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was what I could see coming. The miscarriage had taken our future, the video had taken our trust, and Elena's half-truths had taken whatever hope we had left. I didn't know what the next step would be, but I knew I couldn't stay frozen in this pain. Something had to give, and I was starting to realize it might be me. But before I could decide, I needed answers, real ones, not the patchwork stories Elena kept offering. The truth was out there, somewhere, and I wasn't sure I could move forward without it. The decision to move forward without Elena came slowly, like a tide creeping in. It wasn't a single moment of clarity, but a series of small realizations that piled up until I couldn't ignore them. The guest room had become my permanent space, the door a barrier between us. Elena's apologies, her tears, her promises, they all felt like echoes of a life that no longer existed. The video, the miscarriage, the lies, they'd hollowed out our marriage, leaving nothing but a shell. I didn't hate her, but I couldn't love her the way I used to. And that truth was heavier than any anger I'd felt. I filed for divorce a few weeks after our last therapy session. The lawyer's office was sterile, all glass and sharp angles, and signing the papers felt like cutting a cord I'd been clinging to for too long. I didn't tell Elena right away. I needed time to process it myself, to sit with the weight of ending something I'd once believed was forever. When I finally told her, we were in the kitchen, the same place where we'd shared so many quiet mornings. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Julian, please," she whispered. "We can still fix this. I'll do anything." But her words didn't reach me anymore. I shook my head, my voice steady but tired. "I can't keep waiting for a truth I might never get," I said. "I need to let go." She cried, begged, even followed me to the guest room door that night, but I didn't waver. The video still haunted me. Elena's laugh, the stranger's hands, the crowd's cheers. It wasn't just the act. It was the betrayal of trust, the way she'd come home and acted like nothing happened. And the miscarriage, it was a wound that cut too deep, a loss tied to her choices, even if I'd never know for sure how much they contributed. I couldn't unsee the footage, couldn't unfeel the doubt. My heart had closed off, and no amount of therapy or tears could reopen it. The divorce process was quiet, almost mechanical. We didn't fight over assets or money. Neither of us had the energy for that. Elena moved out, staying with her sister Lila for a while. I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling, that she blamed herself for everything. Part of me felt for her, but I couldn't carry her guilt on top of my own pain. I needed to rebuild, to find a way to live without the constant weight of what-ifs. The house felt empty without her, but it also felt like mine again, a space where I could breathe. Years have passed since then, but the questions still linger. I find myself wondering what might have happened if Elena had skipped that Vegas trip. Would we have welcomed our child? Would our marriage have grown stronger? Or were the cracks always there, waiting to split us apart? I don't dwell on it as much as I used to, but late at night, when the world is quiet, those thoughts creep in. They don't hurt like they once did, but they're a reminder of how fragile trust is, how one choice can unravel everything. I moved on in my own way. I'm not the same man I was when I married Elena, full of hope and certainty. I'm more guarded now, slower to trust, but I'm learning to live with that. I don't regret the divorce. It was the only way forward, but I do wonder about the paths we didn't take. If Elena had been honest, if she'd stayed home, if that video had never existed, would we still be together? Those questions don't have answers, and I've made peace with that. Sometimes you have to let go, even when it feels like tearing out a piece of yourself. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have fought to save the marriage, hoping for a truth that might never come? Or would you have walked away, choosing yourself over a broken promise? I don't know if there's a right answer, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Stories like this don't end neatly. They leave scars, lessons, and a quiet hope that sharing them might help someone else feel less alone.